So for the week 1 assignment, I opted for the 15-minute presentation, so I'll get going with that. So just taking a look into the personal statement, the justifications for violence against Indigenous people always involved from a mix of religious, moral, or survivalist perspectives. And this brought in a more systemic approach based on economic gain and racial superiority, reflecting broader societal changes in attitudes towards Indigenous populations. In my opinion, it is extremely devastating what happened to them and how they were very ignored in American history. And it seems very, very hypocritical now that as Americans, many of us are concerned about illegal immigration when that is exactly how we all got here. We got here and took their land from them. So I do believe that we do not share the correct stories within history classes through curriculums. There is limited discussion of Native Americans in U.S. history, and their stories should be told as they are a part of U.S. history as well. I took a U.S. history course here, and we briefly touched on Native American history in the U.S., and I was a little bit disappointed because we never got to hear their side of the story, so I feel like that was very unfair. I tend to have a general knowledge about Native American history as a previous human rights delegate for my high school, and in addition, my school used a chief as a mascot in which it was revoked for its offensive usage, so that was always a popular topic of discussion as a delegate. So we learned a little bit about offensive uses of certain things, not just in Native American history, but other backgrounds as well. So, moving on to a little bit of a summary for the devastations of Indies, a brief account. In this, a powerful critique of Spanish colonization in the Americas highlights several key themes. He vividly describes the brutal treatment of Indigenous people, detailing the violent slavery and exploitation they suffered at the hands of Spanish colonizers. They also raises moral and ethical concerns, challenging the justifications used by the Spanish and emphasizing the obligation to treat Indigenous people with dignity and respect. He critiques the religious motivations behind colonization, particularly the hypocrisy, of claiming to spread Christianity while committing acts of violence and forced conversion. Additionally, the author advocates for the rights of Indigenous people, calling for reforms in colonial practices and urging the Spanish crown to offer protection. And his work also reflected the early debate surrounding colonization and the treatment of Indigenous peoples, contributing a broader discussion about human rights and the legacy of colonialism. So, within a Plymouth plantation, this shows the experience of the Pilgrims in establishing the Plymouth colony in the early 17th century. It details the journey from England to the New World, and including the struggles they faced aboard the Mayflower and their eventual settlement in Plymouth. So, central to the narrative is the Pilgrims' quest for religious freedom, driven by their belief that they were chosen by God to create a new nation and a new society grounded in very Puritan values. And Bradford describes that there is an early interaction with Indigenous peoples, highlighting both conflicts and moments of cooperation, particularly with figures with different tribes, and facilitated crucial alliances. The challenges of survival, such as harsh winters and food shortages, underscore the importance of community and collaborations between different sets of communities, and faith in overcoming adversity. Throughout the text, it also is reflected on divine providence, interpreting the settlers' experience as signs from God's favor or displeasure. This document kind of serves as a historical document, providing valuable insights into early colonial life and complex relationships between Europeans and indigenous people. So, in Killing Indians in California, so this one kind of examines the violent history of indigenous people in California during the mid-19th century, particularly from 1850s to the 1880s. The study documents the systemic violence against Native Americans, including massacres, forced removals within the broader context of genocide, and details specific incidents that happens that contributed to the very significant decline of indigenous populations. The California Gold Rush of 1848 intensified tensions between settlers and Native Americans as the influx of newcomers led to an increased land disputes, resource competition, and hostility. It's also highlighted the role of state and federal policies that facilitated the oppression and marginalization of indigenous people. Kind of going back to the question that was originally asked, the first question that I discussed, we were briefly talked about Native American boarding schools and stuff like that in U.S. history, but we never really dove into it to the impact that I would like. We briefly touched upon it, and it seemed like almost like we had to just get around it. So just a food for thought. But it also has explored the racial ideologies that justified the violence, reflecting the prevailing attitudes of manifest destiny and a belief in white superiority. Despite the violence, it's acknowledged instances of resistance among indigenous groups, illustrating their resilience in the face of colonization. Ultimately, the narrative through this document emphasizes the importance of recognizing and remembering these violent histories as a part of America's collective past, advocating for a reevaluation on how events like this were taught. So, shifting perspectives, which is going to answer the second question that was asked. Throughout case one, attitudes that I was able to put down was religious duty, and early European settlers often viewed their mission as one of religious conversion, believing they were saving souls. And moral conflict is that the author himself experienced a change of heart, becoming a critic of the violence inflicted of indigenous people. And then these are some justifications. Civilizing mission, the idea that indigenous people were savages who needed to be converted to Christianity. And then many colonizers felt justified in their actions by believing that they were acting under God's will to spread Christianity. So for case two, the attitudes that I was seeing was that the Pilgrims viewed themselves as a chosen group with a mission to create a new society, and the initial fear of indigenous people were often replaced by alliances, but still underscored by a belief in superiority. So regardless of the alliance that they may have created, the Pilgrims still put themselves above, so it was kind of like a hierarchy between the two. So here are some justifications from their perspective, is that the Pilgrims sought refuge from persecution, which justified their settlement, but interactions with Native Americans were often framed as necessary for their survival, leading to both cooperation in some instances, but mostly conflict. And for case 3, entitlement and superiority. By the mid-19th century, attitudes became more aggressive and entitled, with a strong belief in manifest destiny. Indigenous people were increasingly seen as obstacles to progress, leading to a more brutal mindset behind it. And then some reasons behind this were probably economic gain, and a sense of entitlement to land and resources, as well as the narrative shifted to framing violence as a necessary step in the expansion of civilization. So they kind of saw them and almost like technically like walked over them, because they felt that it was a necessary way to expand an economic gain and expand towards quote unquote better civilization. So here's just a summary of the changes in attitudes and justifications. So early justifications were rooted in religious contexts, shifting toward economic interests as colonial ambitions grew. And then there also were early concerns about the treatment of indigenous people, involved into beliefs in racial superiority and entitlement to land. And then initial interactions were complex and sometimes respectful, but over time, indigenous people were increasingly dehumanized and seen as barriers to progress, which kind of goes to now. And what I mentioned previously, there are a lot of usage of Native Americans as mascots for schools, and some look at it in a way of honoring the community, but some designs are just outright offensive. So you see that there where they're almost using dehumanization towards Native Americans in the U.S. And to answer the final question when discussing the concept of presentism, it's essential to recognize that while we should understand the past actions within the historical context, this does not excuse or justify those actions whatsoever. Societal norms and values evolve over time, and just because something was considered acceptable or legal in the past does not mean it was morally right. And we should recognize that and not brush it under the rug like we've been doing. Many practices such as slavery or colonialization and genocide are now widely recognized as violent violations of human rights. So it's important that we highlight indigenous peoples as having their own rights and systems of governance that was violated by colonizers. Understanding the past requires critical reflection rather than passive acceptance, as engaging with historical injustices helps us learn from those mistakes and encourages us to strive for more just society today. In addition, from a legal standpoint of white settlers, it does not equate to their ethical reasoning. Laws can be unjust and are often shaped by those in power. So acknowledging past wrongs is very crucial for understanding their lasting impact on present day society. And then here are just some resources.